freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 443 of Gun Freedom Radio, where we engage, we educate, and we inform. We are brought to you by azfirearmsauctions.com, where you set the price on guns, ammo, and accessories. I am one of your hosts, Cheryl Todd.
And I'm the other guy, Dan Todd. Our theme today is Gun Curious, and our guest today is Professor David Yamane. David is an Asian American and lifelong liberal from the San Francisco Bay Area. He became a first-time gun owner as a 42-year-old and embarked on an immersive 12-year study of American gun culture from his unique perspective as a professor of sociology. David is an author of a new book, Gun Curious, which translates what he has learned, and is a perfect book for anyone who is curious and open-minded about the issue of firearms.
Welcome to the show, Professor Yamane.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to a conversation.
Us too. And, I hate that we have to specify things like, well, you're liberal and we're conservative, right? Isn't that weird that we've come to a place like that about something that is in our Bill of Rights that should transcend all of those things. But I love that it's not something that we have to shy away from talking about and bringing to the conversation.
Yeah, I went back and forth a lot about whether to put liberal in the subtitle or to put professor in the subtitle. But I really thought I would just sort of lean into and signal the fact that I do come to guns and gun ownership and gun culture from a very particular perspective, which sort of, differs from what people commonly associate. So, hopefully that's part of the curiosity that people have is, why me, why a liberal professor, getting into guns, especially so late in life as I did.
No, absolutely. And I think that it also helps to bridge any gaps out there if we just do say, there are people out there who ascribe to a more liberal mindset who do value their gun rights and who do value the tools themselves. So I think it's great that we're bringing it to the forefront. I just always find it odd that we have allowed ourselves to let that particular amendment become this political football and this political divide, because we all want to protect what we love, right? And guns are part of that, being able to use them as tools of self-defense. But
what I think is refreshing is the fact that we have a person who is a liberal
Mhm.
and we're conservative,
Mhm.
that we can talk.
Yeah.
Because
I actually
we're finding
really
that,
like you.
yeah.
I mean, is that allowed?
Yeah, it is allowed. And to just echo your point, I think it's really unfortunate that, that guns have become this political wedge issue, that we are, politically polarized and that people have put guns right in the center of that polarization. And a lot of, my efforts is to actually try to pull guns out of that sort of political morass and really talk about why lots of people might be attracted to guns for lots of different reasons.
Absolutely. And so let's just dive right on into the name of your book. Hold it up for us. I love the cover of this book, Gun Curious, a liberal professor's surprising journey inside America's gun culture. I love that graphic. That is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I swiped your title for, the theme of this show. Because again, I think it makes people go, what is this Gun Curious? So what does that mean as it pertains to your book?
Yeah. I think it means a couple of things. I think the first meaning really kind of reflects my own experience that I got into guns because I was curious about them myself. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, completely outside of gun culture, and that kind of gunless bubble followed me all through my education and my career as a sociologist, which is, one of the bluest bubbles in one of the bluest parts of America, which is the academia. And so I really had no sense of guns at all until I came to North Carolina, where it seemed like everybody had guns. The guys I played tennis with had guns, and my real estate agent had guns, and my fiance had guns. And so, I just became curious about this reality that I knew nothing about. And it also speaks to my professional training as a sociologist. The first principle of sociology is that things are not what they seem. If you think you know
Mm,
what's happening, you need to kind of dig below the surface. So,
I
my
love that.
personal and professional curiosity really came together about a dozen years ago when I was personally getting into guns and I was professionally starting to study guns. And hopefully, the entire book reflects that attitude of curiosity. And then it also is a sort of invitation to people, who also are curious about guns to, open their mind, as you said in the opening, and try to bring that open-minded curiosity to the issue of guns, because really curiosity is at the heart of understanding. If we don't try to open our minds and hearts to things that we don't understand, we'll never learn anything. So it reflects my personal orientation and my invitation to readers.
I really love that. And I myself, my degrees are in psychology, even though I'm working, fields that self-employed and, doing this gun right advocacy stuff. I use the psychology, but to have a master's degree and not like be the person with the sofa and the Freud pipe that I thought I was going to be, came as kind of surprise to me in my life. But there is that natural, open-handed, curious nature of people who are sociologists and psychologists. And if your world is basically social media, right, or the 24-hour news cycle, there is very little modeling of that. Everybody just approaches everything with, I'm an expert, and this is what everyone should believe. And that's the end of the story. And if not, come and fight me. And so whenever I find somebody who has that same sense of, I am really curious about this or about you, I want to know, I get more curious. I want to know more about you, like what makes you how you are. And so this whole, gun curious thing, the idea behind it, you must have had some surprising takeaways during your journey because you didn't approach it with, I mean, you had some idea, but you still stayed open-minded. What were some of the surprising things that came your way?
Yeah, and I'd say the first thing that surprised me, and this happened the very first time I shot a gun when I was 42 years old, and not at all because I was interested in becoming a gun owner or becoming a shooter, but just because, as I said, everybody around me seemed to have guns. I didn't know how they worked, and so I really wanted to know, how do I know if a gun is loaded? How do I unload a gun? How do guns work? So, the first time I shot a gun, that was what my interest was. And, the biggest surprise I took away from that was that it was fun. After the initial shock of that first explosion in arm's distance from my face,
Mm-hmm.
the where I don't even know where the bullet went to, hope probably somewhere in the bale of hay that was behind the target. But from there, I wanted to make the hole in the paper, where I wanted it to go. And so over the course of about 50 rounds, I just became really interested in, the process of shooting a gun. And so shortly after that, I know my wife and I borrowed her dad's old shotgun, and we went out and shot some clay targets. And then we had the opportunity to go to sort of open range days on people's farms. And, so over the past 12 years, really kind of repeatedly being surprised at how many different ways people can use firearms for productive purposes, right? And however you define that, hunting, fun, family bonding, self-defense, of course, is a big part of the work I do. And that's not surprising to you or anybody who's been involved with firearms, but to someone who spent most of their adult life outside of guns and gun culture, and also in these gunless blue bubbles, the notion that people can have fun and behave responsibly and be non-menacing gun owners, that's been a continual surprise to me. And just the other day, my sister was visiting from California. She'd never shot a gun. Now she's 50. I won't say, but we were trying to think of things to do while she was visiting here in North Carolina. She's like, "Can we go to the gun range?" And I said, "Yeah, certainly." So, took her out. We had a fun time. As people say, there's no such thing as an anti-gun gun range, and so. Those kind of moments, I think, are a continual sort of surprise and moment of happiness to me in an area that is just so fraught, as we've been saying. It's easy for us to sit around and argue and yell at each other, but at the root, there's so much good that happens in gun culture that I hope that the book really helps to expose to people who aren't familiar with that.
Absolutely. I have, in all disclosure, I have ordered your book. I cannot wait to read your book, but it hasn't gotten here yet. So I'm very eager to get it in my hands and dive into all that you have to share in there. And you also have a podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
Well, I have a YouTube channel called Light Over Heat. I try to put out a one video every week. And the idea of light over heat reflects this idea that we want to illuminate things. We want understanding, rather than the heat of division and arguments. So I try to address the same issues that concern many people about firearms, good and bad, but do it in a way that kind of lowers the heat and models civil discussion, rather than just that kind of arguing that you noted happens too often on social media.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things I like to say about this. One is, I think that anyone who fires a gun that's never fired a gun before, if they're shown properly the how the process works, they fall in love with them. We took out 30 people one time from a company, and none of them had ever fired a gun before. And we started them with small pistols and worked their way up if they wanted to go to the larger items, even machine guns. And no one said no. And everybody was a gun lover by the time they got past the final guns. And I think that's great. But one of the challenges I see is if I meet someone who is not a gun person, they seem to block you. They don't want to learn because they're dead set in their ways. And it's very difficult. And I think a book like this might be really good to help break that gap.
Yeah, I've my experience has been, especially if I meet people face to face, that it's much easier to sort of melt that ice that can sometimes exist between sort of gun people and people who are more concerned about guns. But just to build on that experience you mentioned, I've for the last 9 years, I've been teaching a course at Wake Forest University called The Sociology of Guns. And before we ever meet in the classroom on campus here, we meet at a gun range, and the students are not required, but they're given the opportunity to shoot a 22 pistol, a 9mm pistol, and an AR style rifle. And in recent years, all of the students have taken that opportunity, including, the majority of students who don't have any substantial experience shooting guns. Now, I can't say, like, with Danny's group, not all of them fall in love with guns, but they all sort of enter the substantive part of the course then with an experiential understanding of why other people might enjoy shooting or might want to have a firearm. A lot of, particularly the female students, even if they're uneasy about firearms, they feel the power there, and they can sense the empowerment that might come from it as they expect to become, professionals, probably working in a city, probably living on their own at the start. And so that experiential understanding, I think, is really crucial. And if we can, it's not possible to do with everyone, but if you can take someone and actually give them hands-on experience with firearms, even if they end up not liking firearms, they at least understand them, much more sympathetically or empathetically.
Right.
I think that is brilliant. And I'm kind of surprised that there is a college, in America today that is like, not only is it okay for you to have the word gun in the title of your class, right? Because it's so triggering to people, the word gun, apparently.
So triggering.
So triggering, right? But I'm bummed. Pun intended. And but also that part of your requirement is we're going to go out on an active firing range. Did you have to fight your way through that, or you just at the right kind of college to do that, or how did that come about? I think this should be everywhere.
Yeah. Well, it is the case that I went with it's easier to apologize than to ask permission. I also have the benefit of being a tenured professor, and so that gives, some latitude to control the substance of our course as long as it has an academic justification. But my idea going into it was it's a field trip. And if we ask the students to go on a field trip from here to Charlotte, which is probably 70 miles on treacherous interstate, they're in at least as much danger driving to Charlotte as they are being on a supervised gun range. So I, didn't feel there was any more risk in bringing the students to the range than in doing anything that we have students do outside of class. So I didn't feel like I needed to request special permission to do it or anything like that. And, to their credit, the university has never questioned my doing it. And in fact, in some years when I was going to a range where I wanted to compensate the range for allowing us to use their facility, the university would actually pay part of that fee to the gun range. So, not only did they allow me to do it, they helped to pay for me to do it. And I can't say that every university would do that. And I know people who want to take their students who teach gun classes, want to take their students to the range, and they've either been too afraid to ask or they've actually been denied that as a possibility. So, the bias against guns in the university is pretty real.
It is, and I really applaud your approach there. Ask
David,
for forgiveness.
during any of your course, is there any safety talks, or are they taught how to be familiar with a gun?
Yeah, we used to do this as part of the field trip, sort of obviously the standard, range safety instructions, as well as introduction to different types of firearms. Now in order to make the time more efficient at the range, I have three pre-recorded videos, one that covers different types of firearms, one that gives very basic marksmanship instruction, and then one that goes over sort of gun safety. The students all have to, take a fairly easy quiz ahead of going to the range that shows they have familiarized themselves with gun safety. And then I reiterate, the rules of gun safety before we actually handle any firearms on the range. So,
That is awesome.
this is something as any responsible gun owner who takes someone to the range needs to familiarize the people they're with the rules of gun safety. I did it when my sister was here. I do it anytime I have someone on the range, especially if the person's on the range for the first time.
Yes, that's
absolutely. I do a lot of speaking around the nation, and a lot of times I try to bring in this analogy that, there's this almost a concerted effort to create a phobic response to this particular tool, right? And, all of us in our kitchens have, these sharp, pointy, instruments that could be used for the wrong reason, right? They're called knives, right? None of us have this Pavlovian gut level phobic response to having knives and small children in the room with those things, right? We put them on the table right next to them. We don't put, I don't at least put locks on my drawers that have knives in them. And the reason is because we teach children. It's the educational piece. We teach them from the youngest ages what the tool is for, what it's not for, how to safely interact with it and handle it. And if we would only do that with guns, I cannot imagine what a positive impact that would have on many layers, with how guns end up being used later on, whether it's, negligent discharges or children getting a hold of a gun that a parent didn't secure properly, or, on and on. What is your take on that as an analogy?
Yeah. Well, my take, one thing I always say is that no one is against gun safety, right? Everybody is for gun safety, but the challenge is that different people have different understandings of what safety means. And for people who are outside of, gun culture, non-gun owners, people who are involved in the gun control or gun safety movement, they understand safety as being safety from guns, right? You just basically, the only way you can be safe is to keep people as far away from guns as possible. Whereas within the gun culture, safety means safety with guns, right? The guns are a part of life, and that people need to know how to live with guns in a safe fashion. And, that includes children, and every, parents have different ways of achieving this. And, for some, it will be, saying, don't ever touch that. If you see the gun, call an adult. And, for other parents, they'll feel more comfortable keeping their guns locked away from their kids or on their person. But in any case, it's about living with guns and safety with guns, as opposed to this other idea of, the only safe gun is one that is not around. And, I have a lot of friends in the gun violence prevention movement. They hate gun violence in the same way I hate gun violence. But we differ pretty strongly in the way to address that.
Right. So David, I mean, it's like my grandkids, we do not own a pool in our backyard. So really, I shouldn't teach them how to swim because we don't have a pool. However, our next door neighbor has a pool and they have kids over there. So my grandkids go over to their house. So we should teach our kids how to react around a pool. Same with guns. Even if you don't own guns in your house, what would it be wrong to teach the kids what to do if they see a gun? Because they may see one walking in the desert, they may see one at a house.
Right.
And so why not the basic how to be familiar? If you see these people that get shot because they take the magazine out of the gun and then they kill them, they shoot something, right? And they don't
forget there's one in the chamber.
There's still one in the chamber. Just the common basic core. If we taught that to kids from day one, the hunter safety course or something, we can't just ignore the guns because they're going to be here no matter what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's, and again, within the gun control movement, there's a lot of talk about, gun owners need to be better trained. There should be requirements if you have a concealed carry permit or to purchase a gun. But then if someone brings up the idea that, hey, maybe every middle school student should have a module in school about gun safety, they're like, whoa, let's not get carried away there. But, I think it makes perfect sense. And I don't know where you grew up. My wife grew up in a small town, a fairly rural county in North Carolina. They took hunter safety education in PE. You didn't matter if you were a hunter or not. You took hunter safety education class. And, that I think that there's something to that. It might be seen as a civic responsibility in a world that has 400 million guns, that people understand how guns work. And again, that was my perspective going into it. I wasn't interested in becoming a gun owner or shooting. I just wanted to know, how do I know if this gun is loaded? How can I unload it? How does it function? And, that plus some, additional material would be great for, everybody to know. And, certainly I fully respect the right of parents to opt their kids out of certain aspects of the curriculum that they disagree with, whether it's sex ed or whatever. But, there is a strong parallel, I think, between this kind of sort of abstinence only sex education that people have disputed for a long time, and a kind of abstinence only approach to guns, right? The only safe gun is the gun that you're not around. But we do know that these are real risks that exist in the world in the same way that knives and swimming pools and cars and walking along the street are. And we want people to be as aware as possible of those risks so that they can mitigate them as much as possible.
Oh,
Right.
exactly. So we've already talked a little bit about maybe some of the misunderstandings about guns, gun owners, gun culture. Um, but what overall, what other things are there that are misunderstandings about us, who we are, our values, our tools themselves? And then maybe flip it on its head and help us maybe better understand the prohibitionists. Maybe we can speak to them better. But go ahead.
Yeah. So the biggest misunderstanding I think that people have of gun owners is that they don't really fully appreciate that gun owners are people too, and, again, in journeying into this area and getting to meet, hundreds of gun owners, you come to realize that gun owners are just like you in certain ways, and they're also different from you in the way that everybody is different in this giant, conglomerate of a 300 million person country. And so this idea of gun owners being people too really evolved into my idea, and it's almost a motto at this point, that guns are normal and normal people use guns. And
Amen.
if there was one message, this is the first chapter of the book, as you'll see when you get your copy. But it's sad that it has to be said, but for so many people who are outside of gun culture, they're so focused on negative outcomes with firearms that they fail to appreciate, the normality of guns and gun ownership for people, for the entire history of the country, right? And, gun culture has changed and evolved over time. But from the very start, with people getting off of their boats in Virginia and Massachusetts colonies, they're carrying firearms. And this has just been
Absolutely.
a constant part of our reality. And that, good news or no, normality is not newsworthy. So this is one of the challenges, right? That what's going to make the news, what's going to motivate people, it's not the, everyday person who takes his sister to the gun range so that she can see what it's like to fire a gun. And so that becomes a real challenge, is how do you get the story of normality out there, really? And I hope that this book is one way that can happen, that people, regardless of where you stand relative to guns, you can see what does a normal, everyday gun owner look like. I don't think of myself as being, a special gun owner in any way. I'm not a marksman in terms of shooting. I've never hunted before, so I'm just an everyday gun owner who's spent a lot of time thinking about guns. And then to flip that on its head, I think, as gun owners, we should have some sort of empathy for why is it that people are so obsessively concerned about those negative outcomes, right? I think gun owners are concerned about negative outcomes as well, but it's not our only way that we relate to firearms. But for people who have no experience with firearms, really the only thing that they know about guns is that they hurt and kill people. And those things are tragic outcomes that we try to prevent and mitigate, but they have a profound effect on people's lives. Being the survivor of suicide, being a family member of someone who was killed, or someone who accidentally shot themselves. So I like to see some empathy for people who largely experience guns through those negative outcomes. And at the same time we express that empathy, also try to model that normality of being a gun owner. And I think that can become a basis for better conversations. If we reach out, Tony Simon, who you probably know, does diversity shoots all the time. He always says go 60%, right? Don't meet people halfway. Go even a little bit further than that and say, if you're talking to someone who's really anti-gun, say, find out why, find out what's motivating that, and then see whether there's some way that you can even make a tiny inroad, having established, yes, I understand that's terrible, I'm sorry that that happened.
Mm.
That here's the way I understand my relationship to firearms,
Mhm.
rather than sort of, there's plenty of that.
Right.
And it's interesting to ask, to ask the question why, because, we assumed it's the news media, it's the colleges, everybody's pushing that guns are bad. And so, it's hard to talk to somebody that's just so covered with that, the news all the
Right. But
time.
maybe we're just
Right.
assuming,
Right.
right?
And
And
so
they
that's
do
why I
have a
say
personal
that's a good one
story.
for me is
Yeah.
to say, well, and why do you feel, why are you against guns?
Yeah.
Why do you not like them? And open it up that way because, gun owners are compassionate too. They feel for people who have pain, and that would be a great way to start the conversation. And I never thought of that.
I love
know?
that. That's fantastic. And I think we all stay in such a defensive posture, right? Because at the core of that, we want to be understood. And we feel that the other side does not understand us. And so we just have to keep talking at them. And I do think sometimes when you express a curiosity, when you're gun curious,
Mhm.
towards them, well, now it doesn't automatically make it where they're going to be as curious and then ask you your journey, but you'll have a much better opportunity. So I think that's very well stated.
Yes.
I think one
S-
of the, if I can just say really
yeah.
quickly, I think one of the other things that, we have to accept is we can have that conversation and we can come away from that conversation disagreeing with each other. And that's fine. Like we don't all have to disagree about
Absolutely.
these things. And, part of, being a very diverse, society of, again, over 300 million people, how can you expect 300 million people to agree on everything? So,
Right.
we have to enter into those conversations also not with the expectation that if this person has any brains at all, they'll agree with us. Or as the other side would say, if you have any common sense, you will
Mhm.
understand that this law is good.
Mhm.
And I constantly tell my friends in, gun violence prevention movement is like, stop talking about common sense gun laws. That's offensive to people who disagree with your positions. You're basically saying they don't have common sense, and that's wrong to do to
Mhm.
somebody.
Mhm.
Well, Professor,
Love that.
I would rather have a conversation with somebody that doesn't agree with me 100% because when I walk away, if they agree with everything and I know that they're anti-gun, then I felt like they just blocked me out. And
Yes.
I want a conversation. Same with talking to liberals versus us being conservatives. I want to know how you click, what's your thinking process, because I want to learn.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
because I want to tell you how wrong you are. I want to learn. Maybe there's something I'm missing.
Yeah.
So is that the core? Have we already answered really what my next question was going to be? Is that how do we have better conversations about guns? And how do we even need to define what we mean by better? Is better you agree with me so I get to walk away feeling like I won? Is better just more productive? Is like help me even unpack that word. What is a better conversation?
Yeah. Well, and again, I respect people who are in the trenches, fighting for people's rights. That's not my sort of orientation. But I sometimes will speak to Michael Bain, who's been in the trenches for a long time, and he kind of looks at me with my liberal optimism and just thinks it's just because you haven't been doing it long enough. But I think that one thing is to think of things as being conversations rather than debates, right? Because
Mm.
you can't win a conversation, right?
Mhm.
Conversations are oriented towards understanding. And you can come away from a conversation, as we've just been saying, disagreeing with the person you were conversing with, but it's a successful conversation if you better understand why they're holding the position they are. So I always try to frame things as conversations rather than debates, and then to begin always with the commonalities we have. So I've seen it done. I've done it myself, where at the very start of you have a mixed group of people who are gathered together to talk about guns, and you say, hey, everybody who's in favor of gun violence, raise your hand, right? Everybody who's against gun safety, raise your hands, right? And nobody does, because we have in common that we are against, most gun violence. It's bracket, legitimate defensive violence. But most people are against criminal violence or suicide and accidental injuries, and we're for gun safety. And just establishing that from the start kind of sets a different tone, right? It sets a tone of like, hey, regardless of whatever we disagree on, like perhaps steps towards realizing some of these goals better, at least we're on the same page about what we're trying to achieve, right? And I think that, again, really does just set a different tone. And I guess the last thing is always just to think of the people that we're interacting with as fellow citizens. I remember being at an event with this guy, Clay Jenkinson. He's a public historian, but he oftentimes does impersonation of Thomas Jefferson. So he'll do presentations as Jefferson. And at the event I was at with him, people would come up and talk to him, and he would always acknowledge them as citizen. He'd say, "Hello, citizen." And I don't think I have the kind of gravitas to pull that off myself. But it reminded me of, what it's like to interact with people and thinking of them, not as my enemy, but as a fellow citizen with whom I disagree, right? And we've had many disagreements over the course of our national history. We continue to have disagreements. And as I said, it's impossible that we won't continue to disagree. So it's really important for us to think of each other as fellow citizens as we're disagreeing.
I think that's brilliant. And I love that idea, because as you were talking, what I wrote down was, maybe think in terms of, you have to separate. If you're talking to a politician, right? Well, generally the things that they say, they have an agenda, they have a direction they want to move. If you're talking to your neighbor, right, who maybe ascribes to a liberal political mindset, or even thinks of themselves in terms of like, I don't want anything to do with guns. You can approach those conversations very differently, because your neighbor probably doesn't have an agenda, right? They just have certain beliefs and values. And I think that we approach every conversation as though the person, whether it's our neighbor next door or whatever, has this agenda and they're pushing it on us. And that's what makes us defensive, and I think shuts the conversation down and makes it more like a win-lose debate in our minds. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I think you have to judge from situation to situation also. I think as Danny said, you can talk to someone and they're just nodding and nodding and nodding, and then you walk away and you realize that, you haven't really made any progress. Or you may have that neighbor who is not going to hear you, which whatever their particular perspective is and whatever issue it is. But, I think if we, do enter things with an open mind, and also, giving our neighbors the benefit of the doubt. I think that's that going 60% of the way idea that Tony Simon says, that if we assume the best intentions on the part of the people we're interacting with until we're proven wrong, that sort of greases the skids a little better than going in, as you said, defensively from the start and just waiting for things to go wrong. And I have, a lot of good and tough conversations about guns with my older sister, who didn't come out this time. But I remember distinctively at one point talking about, this was after Uvalde. And, I was talking about, well, the events are horrible, but they're, incredibly rare statistically. And she said, well, they're not statistically rare to the parents of the kids who were killed. Right. And that just really stopped me in my tracks. And I had to, listen to that and take that in, because I realized that, as a sociologist, I sometimes want to talk about things in terms of statistics and probabilities, and that those statistics don't matter to, people who have been victimized. And on the other side, Masada Yuba always says, that it may be statistically rare for someone to be if you're you observe the rules of stupid, you're statistically unlikely to be victimized. But, Moss always says, that those statistics don't matter if you're the one who's being victimized.
Yeah.
So, again, bringing things down to a kind of human level and realizing, that a lot of this is, flesh and blood and not just kind of numbers.
Absolutely. And during the whole 2020 craziness with the lockdowns and then the riots in the street and the defunding the police and all the stuff that was going on out there, during that time, we still had our retail gun shop, which was, just the little corner store, mom and pop, small town gun shop. And we had lines around the building.
Mm.
And the vast majority of people who were coming in were people who were like our neighbors, across the driveway, who had previously thought of themselves as, I don't need it, I don't want it. I'm not necessarily going to reach into your life and make it where you don't have one, but they came to this place where they thought, well, I guess I am my own first responder because things are going to be happening to me, possibly, and I want to respond with the best way I possibly can. And the reason that we had lines, I mean, lots of gun stores got busy, but I had so many personal messages through Facebook and text to my phone and so on and so forth from my friends, even from high school, who, said, I have watched you online. I've heard that you are not going to bash me. You're not going to make fun of me. You're going to educate me if I come into your store. And I just want to kind of touch base with you before I come in. And that was, to me, that just felt like such an honor to be able to interact and help these people on that journey. And it made me so appreciative that we do have this platform and this way to be able to tell people, this is what we stand for, but we don't hate you because maybe you disagree. And it really played itself out in a very powerful and real way. And so I am so excited again for your book because I think you're doing that whole idea such a service to help people feel like it's okay to change your mind, whichever way you might change your mind.
Yeah, I know, I never hid the fact that I was a gun owner, but I didn't always put that out in front. But in 2019, I spoke at the National Firearms Law Seminar, and I really, sort of came out very openly as a gun owner. I told the story of how I became a gun owner, and I put that video out on YouTube, and it was one of my more successful videos. But it also got people to start approaching me to ask questions more about guns, including, many of my fellow faculty at Wake Forest who also either said, "Oh, I'm also a gun owner."
Yes.
Or,
Yes.
I've been thinking about getting a gun, right? Or could you take me to the range, right? And, so I think it's important for people who, have the disposition and interest to really be ambassadors, for what responsible gun ownership looks like, and to be willing, to take those questions and to answer those questions and to give people those experiences. And, I feel anytime someone asks me, whether it's my sister or a colleague or, whoever asks me questions about guns or asks me to take them to the range, that's very flattering to me because I feel like they recognize that I'm going to be open-minded toward them and I'm going to give them a safe experience. And, lots of people are in that position. And I know lots of gun owners do that same sort of thing.
David, have you had any colleagues that shut you out when they found out that you were a gun owner?
Yeah, it's kind of like that shadow banning idea on social media, right? You don't know if it's happening. And, in my department, we tend not to get in each other's business too much anyway. But it is the case that most of my colleagues don't talk to me much about my work. And, I do oftentimes suspect that other gun studies scholars, just kind of, they're respectful, but they don't engage. I'm giving this public webinar right now on basically an online version of kind of what I do at Wake Forest. And I have over 500 people signed up for the webinar. but there's very few .edu email addresses among the people who registered for the webinar, right? And so that's very interesting to me, because it's not yay guns. I'm basically teaching what I know as a scholar about guns, and very few other scholars have signed up for the webinar.
Super interesting. You can plug the webinar if you'd like. This show's going
Well,
to air on the 22nd of May in 2024.
yeah, that will be the day of the last session of the webinar.
Mm.
So it was 7 sessions. I think I will be putting out the recordings of each of those 7 webinars on my YouTube channel over the summer, so people can get caught up if they missed, if they're not among the people who signed up.
I love that. And, there's probably plenty of people in your sign up list that have another email address that ends in .edu, but they're kind of whispering it with their private email address. So,
That would
all
be
right.
Yeah, you'd
super.
think that
I hope so.
you would think that a professor has an open mind and always wanting to learn
We hope.
and always wanting to know what's going on. So they'd be to welcome your challenge, the challenges they'd have with you. So
We hope. All right, we have got to get on out of here. Please tell folks, hold your book up again and tell folks how they can get that book, how they can follow all the work that you do, and all your social media and so forth.
Yeah, so I'll say that if you go to guncurious.com, that's the homepage for the book. If you find anything I've said here interesting, pre-ordering the book is really helpful, because that gets the book more into the algorithm. It's, I think, fairly priced at $20. If you want to know more about my work, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and so on. If you just go to davidyamane.com, that's a kind of home base for all of my work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all you do. And I look forward to getting my copy of that book. And we'll have to have you back on and unpack it more on the other side of that.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to chat with you all anytime.
I love it. Thanks so much.
thanks, David.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Wow.
Love it. David Yamane. It's like a rock star, but he's like all, bow tie and calm about it, but a complete rock star.
Right.
I'm just so excited to have had him on. We've been, trying to organize it for several years, and it just hasn't worked out. But this was perfect since he had just put the book out there. I just want to thank him, for being that bridge out there and being that person that says it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to be curious and possibly, hear information that could impact you in a way that causes you to have another thought and change your mind. It could save your life. It could save the lives of your family. But also thank you to our amazing listeners all across the globe. Wherever there is internet, we have viewers, we have listeners. Your time is your most finite commodity. And when you spend it with us, we notice it is valued. You are valuable to us. Thank you so much. Also, before we run away, I want to be sure we tell folks we talked a lot about getting out on the range, right? Well, some friends of ours have created this liquid shooting sports chalk called Locked In Grip. And it creates a no slip, better traction, heightened connection for safer, faster shooting and superior grip with Locked In Grip. It was made for shooters by shooters. Go check them out at lockedingrip.com and purchase some for you and your shooting buddies now. And also, whoa, that's upside down. That's a metaphor. America is upside down right now. Let's help turn it right side up by spending more of our dollars in America to support American jobs on American soil with American-made products. And in order to do that, I want to invite you, this is your invitation, to a private invitation-only shopping club that is helping our family and millions of other families cut the cord on those huge box stores, those huge corporations that use our own money against us to diminish our freedom and our individual liberties. From laundry soap to skincare to delicious snacks and What do you love the most, Dan?
The meat,
The
the
steaks.
We even had hamburger last night, and it was really good.
So good. From Riverbend Ranch, that's one of their brands. You can, once you join this shopping network, you can set your order and forget it, which is what I like, because then I've already placed my order. Or you can go in and add things as you think of them. And you know what? You don't have to leave the house because they show up on your doorstep. Your orders show up right there. It could not be more convenient. And when you go there to sign up to become a member, here's the trick. You go to patriothousehold.com/GFR for Gun Freedom Radio. And what that does is every dollar you spend there, not only are you supporting American jobs on American soil, buying American made products, but you're also giving us a tiny piece of every dollar that you spend to help fuel the work that we do. And also, extra bonus, the Second Amendment Foundation that's out there fighting all of these court cases across the nation, they get a small piece of every dollar you spend. And so you are just doing good on top of good on top of good when you go to patriothousehold.com/GFR. All right. Well, until next time. Oh, you know what I forgot to say? I forgot to say, if you want to watch this video over again or any of our videos, where do you go, Dan? You go to YouTube. You go to Gunstreamer, right?
Is that right?
You go to the smartphone app called OpsLens. And when you go there, again, that shadow banning that Professor Yamane spoke about, it gives us a hedge against canceling and against the shadow banning when the platforms that you find our content on know that you value it. So if you hit the subscribe and you hit the notifications, that signals to them that this is important to you. And they will hopefully not end up canceling us in this crazy cancel culture world we're living in right now. And if you want to listen to the audio only version because maybe you're out for a long drive or you're heading out to the range, right? Then you go to our website, gunfreedomradio.com, click the on demand tab, and
Binge listen to your heart's content, darling.
beautifully said. If you want to see photos and bios and links to books that our guests have written, like Professor Yamane's, go to our guest tab. There is a huge resource of subject matter experts there. And when you spend time there, we don't hate that. All right, until next time, we are going to pray for our nation, pray for our leaders, even the ones we don't like.
Yeah.
Maybe especially the ones we don't
Yeah.
like. Till next
that.
time, be
We're gonna
good
do
to each other. You sound convincing, babe.
Oh, sure.
Be good to each other. Have a great week, and God bless.
Bye-bye.